from the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide. In Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, the chaotic and devastating turn in a 2-decade-long war in Afghanistan. The Taliban today is a lot different than the Taliban of 20 years ago, in small part because of how it has used social media and technology to spread stories of their victories, real or not. We'll discuss how their war has gone viral. Plus, the power of social media in times of crisis and opportunity. Facebook's Instagram has been doubling down on fighting misinformation and hate while also trying to woo the next generation of users, influencers, and content creators with an extra $1 billion in incentives. Instagram CEO Adam Mosseri will join us to talk about the platform's priorities in the post-pandemic video-driven era. And up, and away? Will the deadly Delta variant slow down the summer travel and hospitality boom? The CEO of suitcase maker Away, Jen Rubio, joins us this hour. All that in a moment, but first I want to take a look at the markets. And Kriti, what started as a risk-off day with what's happening in Afghanistan, weak Chinese economic data, how did it actually impact the markets, ending mostly in the green?
Well, it kind of seems like investors shrugged it off, right, Emily? So as we go in throughout the day, it ended up being a U-turn kind of story for the markets. And if you look at what's behind me, it kind of looks like a risk-on day. S&P 500 in the green, tech underperforming. It kind of seems like on the surface people went for that risk-on trade. But take a look at that Bitcoin. Flat on the day. It was negative during the session. Really kind of shows you that risk sentiment indicator. It wasn't as strong as the surface level suggests. A lot of investors kind of leaning towards those yielding sectors, your utilities, your consumer staples, even your healthcare stocks. So like I said, not as risk on as it seems. But while we're talking about that tech underperformance, I want to show you how it did on kind of a broader time frame, because we do have those geopolitical tensions in Afghanistan. We also have them in China as well, still ongoing. That kind of divergence that you're seeing between U.S. tech and those Chinese ADRs, it's only getting wider, Emily. I mean, take a look at that. The spread is really diverging even more. And a lot of this has to do with the regulatory scrutiny. A lot of it also will start to come off of this Afghanistan news, this idea that with the withdrawal of U.S. troops, you might have to see more and more intervention from China as well. So that's really where you're going to see the divergence really come to fruition in addition to that regulatory scrutiny. So that's the macro picture, Emily. I want to dive in to some single security names because we did also have some single security movers. Big tech was underperforming. Amazon ended up higher 0.2%, but during most of the session, it was actually one of the worst performers. So you saw that kind of buy the dip mentality end up in big tech, and it was actually leading the indexes down. Like I said, really only rallying in the last few minutes of the day. Then you also have the vaccine makers. I mentioned healthcare was one of the leaders of today. You had Moderna and BioNTech actually negative on the day. So although some of those booster news was actually helping sentiment broadly, you didn't see it show up in those vaccine makers. Some analysts saying that that was a really sell the news event. And lastly, Tesla still dealing with potentially getting probed by that auto safety regulator. And once again, it is one of those heavyweights. So Emily, it could weigh on the index broadly in the coming days.
All right, Kriti, thanks so much there. Meantime, to the story of the hour: confusion, chaos, desperation in Afghanistan as the Taliban reasserts its control of the country's capital 20 years after the U.S. invaded and kicked them out. Scenes of despair at Kabul airport as locals amass on the tarmac, clinging to steps to the plane in hopes of fleeing their country. Afghanistan President Ashraf Ghani has already gone, taking to social media to announce his decision, saying he had to leave to avoid bloodshed. And social media has played a key role in the Taliban's offensive as it's used numerous platforms to consolidate and rally support. Emerson Brooking is a resident senior fellow at Digital Forensic Research Lab of the Atlantic Council and co-author of Like War, the Weaponization of Social Media. Emerson, thank you so much for joining us. Look, Facebook and Twitter didn't exist 20 years ago. How is the Taliban different today than it was 20 years ago, in part because of social media and advances in technology?
Thanks for having me, Emily. It's difficult to overstate how much has changed in 20 years. During the 2001 U.S. invasion, Afghanistan essentially did not have the internet. Very few people had cell phones. Today, about 40% of Afghans have access to the internet. About 90% have access to cell phones. and it's fundamentally changed the way that conflict in Afghanistan plays out. The Taliban were actually relatively early adopters of social media. They opened their first Twitter account back in 2011, years before competing organizations like the Islamic State. They used it to essentially send long press releases to Western journalists to repeatedly declare military victories, even when it was uncertain that a battle had taken place. They did so at such a volume that they were able over time to help build legitimacy. And as platforms evolved, their tactics evolved as well. They expanded to Telegram and WhatsApp by 2015. They emulated these sorts of ISIS-style propaganda videos by 2017. And by 2019, they were evidencing some of the same social media manipulation that we've seen out of nations like Iran and Russia.
So obviously, we are seeing on social media these images from the ground. Without it, we wouldn't know as much what is actually happening there. But would you say that social media has helped the Taliban take its war viral, if you will?
I would. What social media has enabled the Taliban to do is to legitimize itself, to manage to declare numerous military victories, to pose not as a shadow government. The Taliban formerly ruled Afghanistan. Even in their lowest points, they remained a shadow government in parts of the country. But social media has enabled them to portray themselves not as just a shadow government, but as the legitimate government of Afghanistan for quite a while. In many parts of the country, people had already grown accustomed in some ways to Taliban rule. So the explosion of military activity we've seen over the last few days is essentially the Taliban extending the same control over the rest of the country that they already had in some pockets.
How well are these companies doing in terms of moderating their use of these platforms? I saw some people talking on Twitter. Some of them are aghast that former President Trump is not on Twitter, but the Taliban is. What should these platforms, these companies be doing in this very moment at this critical juncture?
The most important thing that the companies can do is protect Afghan people. Afghan people who worked alongside the coalition for 20 years, the Afghan people who were promised a better life in Afghanistan, which has now fallen out of reach. Because I want to be clear, the Taliban check the social media histories and the web presences of people who they stop, people who they suspect of having supported in any way the United States or the West. And it's things as simple as having won a scholarship 5 or 10 years ago to study in a Western school. It's having American or European friends. These things put you in real danger. And they don't just put you in danger, but they put your immediate family and your extended family in danger. So anything that these companies can do to help obscure these sorts of histories, to draw attention when there are obvious vulnerabilities, what the decisions that are made by Twitter and Facebook over the next couple of days will have a direct impact on the lives of many people who now find themselves under the Taliban's rule.
Okay. So much at stake. Emerson Brooking of the Atlantic Council, thank you so much for bringing that perspective to us. All right.
Thank you.
Coming up, we're going to be talking about Tesla. Shares taking a hit, plummeting as the U.S. opens an investigation into the company's Autopilot system after a series of collisions. What this could mean for the self-driving future, next. This is Bloomberg. The U.S. government is opening a formal investigation into Tesla's Autopilot system. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says it launched the inquiry after 11 crashes that resulted in 17 injuries and 1 fatality, all of them involving emergency vehicles specifically. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow joins us now with more. So, Ed, what exactly are investigators looking at here?
Yeah, so the commonality between all of these incidences over the last 2 years is that in each case, autopilot or traffic-aware cruise control was engaged, and in each case, it involved a collision with some kind of emergency services vehicle or emergency response setting. And a spokesperson for NHTSA told Bloomberg that the focus of their investigation initially is around the technology that makes sure the driver is paying attention, even if autopilot is engaged. Remember, if you go on Tesla's website, there's a whole page dedicated to this that says even under autopilot, the driver must have their hands on the steering wheel and be fully attentive. In fact, that also applies to full self-driving, which, as you know, is a test version of not fully autonomous, but somewhat autonomous technology to come down the line. So it seems that regulators are asking the question, how could these events possibly have happened if indeed the driver was paying attention?
So what happens next here? How do you expect this to proceed?
It's not the first time that NHTSA has investigated Tesla or looked at autopilot, and so far no sort of serious regulatory action has taken place. NHTSA does have the ability to call for a recall of those vehicles, even if it's a so-called soft recall, where Tesla updates the software. That seems unlikely. Analysts are unsure. They say it's not clear what the outcome would be if the regulators move to limit Tesla's ability to offer autopilot or later a more fully autonomous service. That obviously would be negative for the stock.
So, shares are falling on this precipitously. Certainly a strong reaction to investors. Is there a real longer-term concern about the company, given that Elon Musk has staked so much of Tesla's future on its autopilot technology?
Right, and year to date, the stock is down. There's been so much focus quarter on quarter with how many vehicles the company is building, how things are going in Shanghai and Germany. But if you remember last year, the big run-up of the stock we saw in 2020, a lot of the price targets that Wall Street analysts were putting out there, a lot of the valuation was based on future growth, future revenues derived from software like full self-driving. Full self-driving is offered at $10,000 a pop or $199 a month as a subscription. That is high margin revenue. Tesla trades at a crazy multiple right now. It is not based on how many vehicles, electric vehicles, it delivers to customers. It's based on a lot of its future promise around software, around robo-taxis. And as Elon Musk admitted himself over the weekend, it's getting harder for them to make this a reality. They really need to crack artificial intelligence first. So that's kind of what we're looking forward to this week.
All right, Ludlow, thanks so much for that update. Meantime, in Delaware, Elon Musk has tried to convince a judge he was just doing his job. A 2-week trial focusing on his role in Tesla's $2 billion purchase of the power provider SolarCity is wrapping up. Musk was chair of the solar company and CEO of Tesla at the time. For details, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's Dana Hull, who of course covers Tesla for us. So Dana, the judge has to weigh here whether Elon Musk properly removed himself to avoid conflicts of interest here. What exactly is the judge going to be deciding here?
Yeah, so today we heard final testimony from Antonio Gracias, who is a longtime Musk ally. He serves on the Tesla board. He was on the SolarCity board at the time of the acquisition. He's on the SpaceX board. And what was really interesting about Antonio's testimony today was that he was like, look, Elon recused himself from voting on the deal, but he didn't recuse himself from being the CEO. And as the CEO, he sort of had a responsibility to provide, insight into what he thought. And so it's sort of like, it gets to the bottom line of well, what does recusal mean? Is it enough that he was recused from the vote, but was still sort of intimately involved in the negotiations? That's what the judge is going to have to really think about.
Now, Musk himself testified. Tesla board members testified. How well did they make their case?
So to be clear, I wasn't in the courtroom in Delaware, but I was able to dial in today to listen to Antonio, and I think it's a pretty hard case. I mean, if you take Tesla's perspective, this acquisition was 5 years ago. It was $2 billion. $2 billion is like a drop in the bucket if you look at the market cap of Tesla today. And everything that they said they were going to do, like start, integrating solar with batteries in the car, I mean, they've kind of done that. But the crux of the issue is, at the time, did investors fully realize that SolarCity was sort of in trouble? And did Musk really properly recuse himself, or was he more involved in the negotiations than shareholders realized? And I think that the plaintiffs made a pretty strong argument in that regard. And the fact that the case actually even got to trial is pretty telling. I mean, the other board members settled, Musk did not. So this testimony is really about Musk at this point, and then you had board members sort of testifying in Musk's defense about his role.
So when could we expect a verdict, and what could the penalty be?
Right. So, there's no jury. This is just Judge Joseph Slights. He has all the time in the world. We're not really expecting to hear anything until maybe November at the earliest. And it's a shareholder derivative lawsuit. So even if the plaintiffs win, what happens is the money goes back to Tesla as a company. So it's not like there's a payout to the pension funds. It's like the money all goes back into the same pot, which is Tesla. But, he could order Musk to repay $2 billion. He could split the difference. It could be a much smaller sum. Again, Musk is now the richest person in the world. He still is Tesla's largest shareholder. So it's not going to be like a huge hit to him financially, but it would be the first time that Musk would have ever lost in court.
All right. Well, we'll continue to follow developments there. Bloomberg's Dana Hull, thanks so much for that update. Meantime, as we head to break, let's take a look at how Roblox shares are moving after hours. The popular video game developer reporting second quarter bookings that fell short of Wall Street estimates. We're going to dig into all the numbers and talk about the future of the company beyond its games. Meantime, Ryan Reynolds' latest film, Free Guy, topping the U.S. box office this weekend. The movie was acquired by Disney when it bought 20th Century Fox. Unlike other recent Disney releases, Free Guy was only available in theaters and not on the streaming service. Even so, it managed to take in $28.4 million, better than the $20 million analysts had been expecting. This is Bloomberg. Walmart is joining a growing number of corporations exploring the viability of Bitcoin and other digital currencies. The world's largest retailer wants to hire a crypto expert to develop a blockchain strategy. Walmart's job posting coming several weeks after Amazon did the very same thing. This indicates big retailers may soon let customers pay with cryptocurrencies. Rapper and entrepreneur Jay-Z wants to add gambling mogul to his description. Bloomberg has learned that he's joined sports merchandise giant Fanatics in its bid to get into the mobile sports betting business in New York. Sports betting is a high priority for Fanatics. It is undergoing a reorganization under Michael Rubin, the founder and executive chair, who's now taking over as CEO. And Roblox posted lower than expected bookings for the second quarter, but the popular game maker did see active daily users rise 8% in July from the month before. Roblox is trying to broaden its user base beyond children. It's also developing social media features to enhance user experience. Part of that push is its development of the metaverse, where the platform is considered to be a leader. To discuss this and the tech trends that will power the metaverse, we're joined by Alicia Leidacker, Creative Tech Director at Technicolor's The Mill. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us. So coming out of a pandemic, I know my kids are still playing Roblox before and after school when we allow them to, and sometimes they sneak it. But how much power does Roblox have in a post-pandemic world where kids have so many options at their disposal?
So that's a great question. And I think we've seen over the last year, one of the areas where I think gaming platforms like Roblox have really succeeded is bringing new experiences, both to kids and to adults alike. During the pandemic, they did one of the first virtual concerts in their virtual gaming platform with Lil Nas X, where they had over 30 million viewers tune in to see this concert. And we're starting to see more and more brands start to really adopt Roblox and see Roblox as an opportunity to do different types of experiences and events. We saw that In the Heights did one of their premieres, a week-long activation of doing a bunch of different mini games and experiences for the premiere of In the Heights. And we've seen fashion moguls as well, like Gucci, do activations in Roblox to really start seeing how brands and different experience makers can utilize these virtual platforms for exciting experiences in the virtual world.
Now, obviously, virtual live events are on the rise, but talk to us about the more mainstream future of augmented and virtual reality. How far off is mainstream adoption, and what's coming next?
So when we look at augmented reality, I think there's so many different areas of AR. Oftentimes when I ask people, have you used augmented reality? They go, no, I haven't. And then I ask them, have you used Instagram with different types of AR filters? And they go, oh, that's augmented reality? I didn't realize that. And I think it's a really great stepping stone for people to start getting adopted with augmented reality. We're seeing also a lot of augmented reality applications that are powered through mobile. WebXR is something that has become very popular in the last year, especially for brands to think about how they can actually create experiences where the user just has to scan a QR code with their mobile phone and they can play a game or they can experience something in augmented reality. Now, when people think about augmented reality with glasses, the kind of HMD side, I feel we're still a couple years away from that. There'll probably be a little bit of stepping stones before AR glasses become full-on mainstream. Companies though like Snapchat, I think, are doing really interesting things in this avenue to make the glasses more mainstream.
We're actually going to be speaking with the CEO of Instagram next, so we'll mention augmented reality. You know, Roblox, Epic, Niantic, all players in this metaverse of the future. Mark Zuckerberg wants Facebook to be a, quote, metaverse company. Quickly, what do you think about that?
So I think that in part is why so many people are talking about the metaverse right now. And in part, they're worried. When a lot of us foresee the metaverse, we see this as a decentralized platform. Many of us call it the Web3 or the decentralized web, where the idea with the metaverse is it won't be one or a couple of tech companies who are going to be owning the metaverse. So for us, we're really excited about making this where it is decentralized, where the user at the end of the day owns their own data in the metaverse. And as much as Facebook, they've got amazing technologies and hopefully are one of the partners that are pushing that technology forward. I think it's scary to think that they might be pushing to be the one that owns it.
Alicia Ledakar of The Mill, thanks so much for sharing your perspective there. Fascinating where the world is going. Coming up, take a listen.
We're no longer a photo sharing app or a Square photo sharing app. The number one reason people say that they use Instagram in research is to be entertained. So people are looking to us for that.
Instagram CEO Adam Mosseri coming up next, talking about plans to double down on video creators and more. And later we'll talk about the future of the travel industry as the Delta variant continues to take off. Jen Rubio joins us later. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Let's get back to our top tech stories of the day. Our Ed Ludlow back, taking a look at a big project Facebook is taking on at the bottom of the sea. Ed, explain.
Yeah, so Facebook is working with a coalition of telecoms companies with To Africa to increase the deep sea fiber optic cabling going into Africa to boost connectivity. Remember back in the 90s, every telecoms company was laying billions of dollars of fiber optic across the seabed all over the world. But this one, according to sources, is a $1 billion project hoping to come online by 2024. What they're doing is upping an existing plan. Bring up a map. I love to look at maps because some of the locations they're targeting are really interesting. It's not just mainland countries like Nigeria, Angola, but also the Comoros Islands, the Seychelles. And it made me pause. Why would Facebook do this? Remember, 2/3 or a vast majority of the world's internet-connected population is already on Facebook, but the continent of Africa has 1.2 billion people. It's a continent where smartphone adoption is still nascent and increasing. So if you think about it, it's one area of growth that Facebook can target. One of the top stories on the Bloomberg today. Emily.
All right, Ed, thanks so much for that update. Meantime, $1 billion. That is how much Facebook and Instagram plan to pay their creators over the next year in a massive bid to woo more influencers to the platform and away from competition like TikTok, Snap, YouTube. The creator economy is a rapidly burgeoning industry where just about anyone can cultivate their fan bases and followings. It is changing social media as we know it, so much so that head of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, recently declared Instagram is no longer a photo sharing app. He joins us now to explain. Adam, welcome. So when you said that, it was kind of a moment. Explain to us what exactly you mean there. I know you have more features for video coming. Expand on this vision.
So in general, we're always trying to see how the world is changing and trying to adapt as the world changes. Because though competition is a big risk, one of the biggest risks is that what we do becomes irrelevant. And one of the most important changes right now is this explosive growth, specifically in mobile video. And so we want to lean into that. That doesn't mean that you won't be able to post photos or see photos from your friends or the creators you're interested in over time. That will always be part of Instagram. But it does mean we need to lean more into mobile first video, because we're seeing it's a trend that's driving growth across the entire internet and all social platforms. And it's one that we feel like we've been out of position on over the last few years.
So obviously you're investing in creators, you're trying to simplify the experience for creators. What exactly do you think it is? And obviously Instagram has the scale. What else do you think is going to woo creators from spending their time on other platforms, whether it's TikTok or YouTube or Snap, and on Instagram and Instagram alone?
Well, I think we have a relatively unique combination of being a global platform and that reach that you mentioned, but also being a platform for a whole variety of types of creators. We're seeing power shift from institutions to individuals across all sorts of industries. Athletes are becoming more relevant than teams. Journalists and editors are becoming more relevant and building up their own brands outside of the publications that they work for. And that we think we're a great place for video creators, for photo creators, even for writers and politicians and athletes. And so we think we have a unique combination of global reach, but also a wide variety of tools for a wide variety of types of creators.
Obviously, the competition is vast. Is there, and I know you're watching it, is there anything you're learning from the competition, like, say, TikTok?
Absolutely. TikTok specifically is really good at a few things. One of them is to be really reliably entertaining, but another is they're great at finding new talent, small creators that have yet to make it or break out, and connecting you with them and finding them or the small talent that you might actually love. Instagram is better for creators that are already established, but I think we need to be better at helping new and aspiring small creators break out in the first place. And so that's something that we're trying to learn from and learn from quickly.
Now, you've been coming out with new tools to tackle racism, to tackle hate, to tackle harassment, misinformation. But at the same time, creators often complain about shadow banning or deprioritizing accounts, hiding posts. Does Instagram shadow ban, and when?
So shadow banning means different things to different people. Some people use that term to mean having content taken down that they don't agree with. Sometimes they mean it as an account suspension. Sometimes they think it's because they're not reaching as many people as they intend to reach. And so what we're trying to do is be as transparent as we can across the board and make as few mistakes as we can across the board. But there is an inherent tension between keeping people safe and helping people express themselves and reach as many people as they can. And that is a balance that we're always trying to get right. We get it wrong. Sometimes we make mistakes, but we think that over time, being more transparent and public about exactly how our systems work and where we make mistakes and how much we take down, how much proactively, and giving people tools and controls to appeal those decisions, because we do sometimes get them wrong, will get us to a healthier place overall.
Now, Facebook, of course, has benefited from the pandemic as people have been stuck at home. How do you expect that engagement to be maintained or to change when we can all see each other in person again?
So the pandemic, I think, has accelerated a number of trends that predated COVID-19. Some of them are things like the growth of mobile video, which we talked about, but also the shift of commerce from offline to online, the growth of remote presence and messaging and video chatting and voice chatting. Some of the other shifts are shifts in spend from services to products, for instance. I think those will probably snap back in a different sort of way. So what we're trying to understand is which of those trends are long-term trends that jumped forward a few years, or what normally would have taken a few years, but they did it in a few months, and which of those are more temporary. And again, this is always what we're trying to do, is understand how the world is changing around us and then trying to adapt accordingly, because people change their interests quickly. There's a lot of competition out there, as you mentioned, and we want to make sure that we stay relevant.
Well, speaking of that, Facebook, of course, has been under fire for COVID misinformation. Instagram has become a hotspot for anti-vaxxers, and with Delta taking off, the stakes are only getting more dangerous. And when vaccines are available for kids, that campaign is only going to get more fierce. What is your plan to get that under control?
So I'm actually very proud of the work that we've done on COVID-19 more broadly. In the beginning of the pandemic, we did a lot to encourage people to stay home, to wear masks, to get them access to good information from local health organizations. And then on misinformation, on mitigating the bad, we actually modified our policies. Historically, we would let misinformation exist on the platform, but reduce its distribution because we didn't want to be the arbiters of truth. But when it comes to vaccine or COVID-related misinformation, we now actually take that content off our platform entirely. Some of it still gets through. We're getting better at catching more of it more quickly. We rely on health organizations outside of Instagram and third-party fact checkers as well to try to augment our efforts. And I think we've made a lot of progress over the last year. So overall, I'm actually very proud of the work that we've done to try to support people and businesses through an incredibly trying time.
Meantime, we're in the middle of another international crisis. We're seeing pictures flooding in from Kabul on social media. We also talked earlier about how the Taliban have expertly used social media. What are you doing in this moment to make sure that Instagram isn't spreading or amplifying terrorist messaging in Afghanistan? We just had a guest on who said the decision that social media platforms make right now could decide lives.
So what's happening in Afghanistan is quite frankly terrifying right now. It turns out the Taliban is under US sanctions, which means that due to our dangerous organization policies, we don't actually allow any presence, any celebration, any promotion, or any representation of the Taliban on Instagram or on any of the Facebook apps or applications. And so we were relying on that policy to proactively take down anything that we can that might be dangerous or that is related to the Taliban in general. Now, this situation is evolving rapidly, and with it, I'm sure the risks will evolve as well. And we're going to have to modify what we do and how we do it to respond to those changing risks as they happen.
Now, you've been working on Instagram for kids, and I know you have kids, I have kids. As a mom, it sounds like it could be cool, but also kind of a nightmare. Why shouldn't parents be terrified of this?
So we know that kids today want to be not only on Instagram, but on social media platforms more broadly. And we also know that there's no foolproof way to verify age for a group of people who don't yet have an ID. So as a father, I have to imagine it is better for us to build a product designed for kids that incorporates parental oversight and control than to pretend like kids aren't lying about their age and getting online right now. And so we knew we were going to get a lot of scrutiny over this and a lot of criticism, but fundamentally, it's just the right thing to do in our opinion. And so we're pushing forward and trying to figure out how to do or how to build a version of Instagram for kids that is safe, that deeply empowers parents so that they can have oversight and control over their children's experiences and keep them safe.
Meantime, the goal is always innovation, right? And Facebook has been facing major antitrust scrutiny, in part because of its acquisition of Instagram. Instagram has been hugely successful for Facebook. Will this scrutiny hamper Facebook's ability to make acquisitions and to innovate?
Well, it's certainly more difficult for us to make acquisitions than it was a number of years ago. And in general, the amount of scrutiny that we're under does affect us. There's a lot of compliance work, there's regulatory work, but there's also for people here. There's a lot of people who work at Instagram and at Facebook more broadly, and they can easily become demotivated under certain amounts of scrutiny or questions. But in general, what we try and do, and what I try to do as a leader, is make sure that my teams are focused on what matters most, which is creating the value for the people who use our products every day. And we have teams that try to focus more specifically on compliance or safety and integrity. But in general, we want to make sure that we're innovating and making sure that the people who use Instagram can connect with their friends, can be entertained. The businesses that use Instagram and the creators that use Instagram can make a living and do what they do best. And so I try to make sure that my teams focus on that as much as possible.
Now, Apple also getting antitrust scrutiny as well, and their new ad tracking software has hurt Facebook, and it's also hurt Instagram. Meantime, there's this controversy over new software features they're integrating to, they say, protect children. Do you think Apple is taking its own power too far?
I won't say that they're taking it too far, but I will say that they do have an immense amount of power, not only over Facebook and Instagram, but of anybody who relies on iOS or the App Store to do their business. And they also have a lot of access to a lot of personal information. But you mentioned the scrutiny more recently around proactively scanning people's private photo galleries. In general, there is tension here, and I want to recognize that it is important for any organization to do what it can to protect people, and particularly children. But there is a real tension between safety and privacy. And these questions are important, and they need to be discussed and argued about in public, because it is one of the most existential debates of our generation.
Meantime, Mark Zuckerberg has announced that he wants Facebook to be a metaverse company. And we were talking about augmented reality on Instagram earlier. Obviously, there's so much potential when it comes to e-commerce. I know you're working on that. Give us an example of how Instagram will be part of this metaverse vision.
So I think the vision for what the metaverse is quite honestly evolving. We used to predominantly access the internet through keyboards and a mouse and a glowing rectangle that was about 15 inches wide. Now we mostly access the internet through these small 6.5-inch glowing rectangles that we call phones. But this is going to change in our lifetime. And it already is right now. I mean, you've got people with watches that can tell them how they're doing. I talk to an Alexa or Google Home or our portal on a regular basis. Eventually, things like these will be able to be serving us augmented reality in all sorts of ways, and we'll access the internet in new ways that'll be much more distributed and much more subtle. And so in that world, what is Instagram is a question that we are going to wrestle with over the next 3 to 5 years or 3 to 7 years. But in general, we think that the fundamental needs that we try to meet, helping people connect with their close friends, helping people be inspired and entertained, particularly through the eyes of the creators that they admire, those needs are going to stay the same. How we meet those needs is going to have to change as how people communicate and use the internet and access the internet changes.
All right, well, we'll all certainly be watching what Instagram becomes. Head of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for stopping by. Okay, coming up, the travel industry has been hit hard by the pandemic, of course, and as Delta cases continue to rise, a full recovery could be a while away. After the break, we're going to speak to the CEO of the luggage maker Away, Jen Rubio, for her outlook. This is Bloomberg. Becoming the CEO of a company during a pandemic would be a challenge for most, but when that company is part of an industry that's still struggling to rebound from the global shutdown, well, that challenge becomes even greater. Jen Rubio is the CEO of the luggage maker Away, a company that was worth $1.45 billion before COVID hit, and she joins us now for our work shifting segment. And Jen, obviously a huge task that you have taken on, but you've been with the company for an incredibly long time. Talk to us about the trends you're seeing right now as we sort of come out of the pandemic in fits and starts, and whether you think that shifts with the rising concerns about Delta.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, earlier this summer, we all got a taste of what it was like for things to open back up, and we could really see that pent-up demand for travel accelerating the recovery for the industry. But we're surprised and cautious. I think the variants, there's misinformation, the lack of consistency around COVID mandates, it's all caused a lot of unease and hesitation for travelers. But while there are reports of bookings being down, the number of active travelers actually going through TSA hasn't yet declined. So we'll continue to monitor, but consumers, I think, are just excited. Travel is still a big part of their lives. They want to be able to do it, even if it is limited. And we want to be prepared to capture the demand that's there.
So you added new product lines in the pandemic beyond suitcases, neck pillows, pet carriers. What are your expectations for growth, including suitcases, in the months ahead, given the uncertain circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our product offering, we've really just scratched the surface of what we can offer. In fact, we've actually had to take a pause on all of the things we wanted to launch over the last year, given the situation with travel. But right now we continue to be focused on the recovery. But in terms of what we can offer, we have a lot up our sleeves. And what we're actually seeing is that the rebounds that we see actually precede that of the larger travel industry, given where we exist in the life cycle for travel. So we hope to be a little bit ahead of the curve as we see what this recovery looks like.
Now, price inflation seems to be an issue in the supply chain. Are you seeing price increases for any of the raw materials that you're using to make your materials? And what about labor? How hard is it to find workers right now when we're seeing a labor shortage?
Yeah, supply chain and labor are definitely very much top of mind for us, as it is for any company with a global supply chain and a global workforce. But we're actively monitoring the ongoing volatility. I will say, like many others, we're seeing greatly increased costs to get our products to the US and to our customers. We're seeing factory closures in some of the places where we manufacture because of labor shortages and because of COVID. And we have seen some stockouts as we've met all of this with stronger than expected return of sales. And I think we just have to take it day by day and constantly adapt our production and inventory strategies.
Now, Away has had some internal challenges over the years. What are you doing to start a new chapter for the company? What kind of company culture do you want to cultivate?
Yeah, it's a great question, because culture has, I think, always been at the top of our minds, but there's maybe been a gap in, candidly, the experience of the employees and the culture that we've been talking about. So, for now, for me and for the incredible exec team I have supporting me, I think it's just actions speak louder than words. It is doubly difficult to build a culture, especially in an environment where we're working remotely and the workforce is distributed. But I think just following through on our intentions and the culture we talk about, which is collaborative, which is inspiring, which is putting the team first. I think the experience that our employees actually have is what's important.
Now, once you're ready to travel again, I know you're a new mom. Congratulations. Any top destinations on your list?
Yes, like many people from the US who are posting on Instagram, we're hoping to go to Italy. But again, I think just keeping a close eye on what happens as the rules around every border continue to change every day.
All right, Jen Rubio, CEO of Away. Great to have you on the show, Jen. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, U.S. Congress wants to change the way your smartphone works. We're going to find out what this means for users and big tech with our Bloomberg Tech's Brad Stone. That's next. This is Bloomberg. U.S. lawmakers are intensifying their fight against big tech. Last week, Congress introduced the Open App Markets Act, a bill aimed at curbing the power of two tech giants, Apple and Google, over their dominant mobile operating systems. A similar bill was also introduced in the House. For more on this, we're joined by Brad Stone, our senior executive editor for global tech coverage. So, Brad, what do you make of this development?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we've just seen a number of approaches on Capitol Hill when it comes to curbing the power of the tech companies. You had David Cicilline's bills from the House. It was all about kind of curbing big mergers or really forcing some divestitures. You have Amy Klobuchar's more kind of broad strengthening of antitrust laws. But this is really targeted, these bills targeting Apple and Google. And I think in some respects, I mean, these are it's now bicameral legislation, it's bipartisan. I think maybe these have a little bit of a better shot at actually happening. But the issues here are the same. It's like, what kind of power, how much freedom do the big tech companies, the platforms have to set their own economic rules? And that's what is being targeted here. Apple and Google want to take a 15 to 30% cut of App Store revenue. And increasingly, you have companies like Spotify and Tile and Epic Games that are complaining bitterly about that.
Meantime, you've got big tech companies complaining about each other. We just heard from the head of Instagram. And of course, we know that Apple and its ad tracking technology has had a big impact on Facebook and Instagram as well. And he wouldn't go so far as to say he believes Apple is abusing its power, but that Apple does have a lot of power. Where do you think this goes next? And how fast does this move?
There's a lot of momentum behind these bills. As I said, they're bipartisan. They're now versions of the bill in both the House and Senate. But look, let's look at this from a user perspective. You're an iPhone or an iPad user. You try to sign up for Netflix on your device or Spotify or get a subscription to a game like Fortnite. And oftentimes those companies, they don't let you do it and they don't explain why. And it's because Apple really limits. It's a battle over who owns the customer. and Apple believes that it does, and it wants to take a percentage of the revenue. And so the companies kind of throw up their hands and leave it to users to go and find them on the web and sign up for those subscriptions. So ultimately, I think the reason why there's a little bit of momentum here is that these business disputes have just led to a bad customer experience, and allowing apps to be sideloaded onto an iPhone or iPad or even an Android device, allowing these companies to advertise that they might be charging lower prices on the web or on other apps. I mean, there's a real economic argument for that and a real user experience argument. So I think these bills, more so than the others we just mentioned, probably do have a chance of moving forward.
Quickly, any response from the companies, or just leaning back on what they've already said?
They're going to fight it, and you can be assured that there's some very intense behind-the-scenes lobbying efforts to go and fight those bills right now.
Indeed. Bloomberg's Brad Stone, thank you so much for that update. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We're going to be joined by Alexis Ohanian, founder and managing partner of the venture capital firm 776, and of course, co-founder of Reddit. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.